So, what is the process that we use when we want to work on something with our children where the behavior seems to be needing improvement? How do we go about that as a family? Well, there's three-step process that we use, and I'd like to share with you that process and some of the resources that we have to help that process be possible for your family as well. For our family, what we do is we look at three different levels of things that could have had an effect on this behavior in our child. The first thing that we check is the training. The second thing that we check is the emotional needs or the emotional health. And then finally, we look at the heart issues or sin issues that could be involved in the behavior. So the first thing is the training. We ask ourselves, did we ever actually train our child in this behavior? What does that mean? That's our job as a parent to go ahead and teach them the correct way to behave in a certain situation. It's pretty easy to think, well, they ought to know it, or they certainly have been told. But is that training? Have I actually held a life skills practice about this behavior? Have I actually taught them, walked them through, helped them be able to do this well? And if I have, then I go ahead and look at step 2. But if I haven't, I need to take the time to do that. And we have a book about that called Practicing Behavior. Are you trying to train your child on the field during the game? So that goes into a little more depth on how to go about training your child in a way that they will have the skills necessary to behave properly in certain situations. So if I've gone ahead and checked whether or not this is a training issue, a challenge that they haven't been trained in, and seen that actually I have trained them, the second thing that I'll check is their emotional health. Look to see whether or not this could be an area in which they've had an emotional injury or need specific emotional care. Could it be one of the 5 emotional needs that every child has not been met in a way that is part of my responsibility as a mom? And if that's the case, then I need to take the time to care for that emotional need. We have a book about that called Emotionally Healthy Children, and that goes over what those 5 emotional needs are and how to care for them, how to identify if the challenge is an emotional challenge, an emotional injury, something that the child is struggling with. Then after that, I check and say, well, it hasn't been a training challenge, it hasn't been an emotional challenge, it probably then is a heart issue or a sin challenge in my child's life. So I need to take time to identify what that is. And just as I do and you do and we all do, our children each have certain areas in their lives that they struggle with, needing to overcome certain sins. And it's important that we find out what that root sin is, because it may manifest itself in several different ways, and just caring for the behavior, if it's a sin issue, is not going to solve the problem. We need to get down and find out what the underlying cause is. And so we have a book about that called Finding What the Heart Issue Is Instead of What the Problem Looks Like. That'll give you the tools to look into your child's heart and find out what's going on in a deeper way besides what it looks like on the surface. So that's the third step in the process that we use to identify what the root is of the behavior in our child that we see needs to be improved. And it's important that we carefully identify which of those 3 things it is, because if it was a training issue and I brought chastisement or discipline into my child's life when I hadn't done my job as a parent and I hadn't trained, I'm going to be putting a wedge between myself and my child. And so I want to be careful that I don't discipline if I haven't actually trained. If it's an emotional need and I also come down with chastisement or discipline instead of the care and the building up, our child's and my relationship will be damaged. There will be a problem between us. But finally, if there is a heart issue that is based on a sin problem in our child's life and we don't chastise, correct our child for that, we're going to be putting a wedge between them and God. So it's important that we take time to identify what is the reason for the behavior that we're seeing in our child that we would like to improve. So to recap, those 3 steps are: first, have I done the training that's my responsibility? Secondly, could it be an emotional injury or emotional need that my child has? And then finally, is there a heart issue, a sin issue that we need to work on with our child? Using that 3-step process actually gives a lot more pleasant times in working with our children. We're able to build our child up, to encourage our child, and then bring chastisement when the time is there. But it's such a time that is rare compared to if we are bringing discipline or chastisement for every behavior that we see that's inappropriate, when often the reason for it is not something that needs to be corrected, but needs to be taught or cared for.